Hi, everyone. I'm Lana. Vice President Mike Pence says that the White House coronavirus task force could start winding down in the coming weeks. In a pen-and-pad meeting with reporters today, the vice president said that conversations are being had about winding down the task force. And he said that he's looking at actually a Memorial Day window, but that work on testing and stockpiling will continue. CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid was actually talking with one of the principal members of the task force at the same moment that the vice president was making those remarks. And we are lucky to have Paula joining me now. Paula, you were actually on the phone with Dr. Fauci when this news from the vice president broke. What did Dr. Fauci tell you?
This is such a remarkable moment, and it really illustrates how complicated it is to cover news here at the White House. A New York Times story broke saying that members of the task force had been informed that the task force was going to start winding down. At that same time, the vice president was holding an off-camera briefing for some reporters. Our colleague Ben Tracy was there, and the vice president told these reporters that, in fact, yes, discussions were underway to wind down the task force. As you noted, he laid out a timeline. And at the same time, I called up Dr. Anthony Fauci, and he told me, in fact, he had heard nothing about this. So the fact that the vice president would be telling reporters that they are going to disband or wind down the coronavirus task force without having any discussions with its top medical expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who many Americans have come to trust when he's not at the briefings. I get text messages from my mom's book club, from people all over the country asking where he is. The fact that he wasn't in the loop on this discussion is significant.
Now, so what state does that leave the task force in going forward?
Well, right now we're trying to get answers on what it means to disband. Will these folks just go into a smaller group? Will it be a different group focused on mitigating these social mitigation, on social distancing? Will they switch to focus on economics? It's not clear. But one thing is clear. The vice president was asked if he would keep on Dr. Deborah Birx, one of his other top medical experts. He said yes, that she will stay around, quote, every bit as long as we need to. And then the question is, what happens to Dr. Anthony Fauci? He is a decades-long career servant. Technically, the president cannot fire him or dismiss him from his job. It's complicated because he's a career public servant, but as expected, he will still remain as the director of his institute at the National Institute of Health. But again, a lot of folks have really looked to him for answers and for accurate scientific information in this crisis, especially as there have been mixed messages and not always necessarily science-based claims coming out of this White House. A lot of folks are going to be looking to see if this actually happens and what it means for these top doctors.
Absolutely, and we need science and evidence and proof and all of those things as we're trying to battle this deadly disease. And I'm so glad that you brought up this point about Dr. Fauci because, Paula, there have obviously been rumblings about President Trump not always getting along with Dr. Fauci, at one point even retweeting somebody who suggested that Fauci ought to be fired. Can you remind our viewers a little bit more about their troubled history and some of the positive things that the president has said about him?
That's right. Well, publicly, the president has had pretty much nothing but praise for Dr. Fauci. He did, as you note, retweet someone else who was calling for #FireFauci. Some of the president's supporters and folks on Twitter have been critical of the doctor, have called for him to be fired. But their relationship has been a bit of a mixed bag because Fauci has been one of those few officials who has been willing to go out and criticize and contradict at times this administration. He said at one point that this administration was too slow to respond and ramp up for coronavirus. Now, you saw him at a press conference kind of walk those comments back, say they were taken out of context. He's also levied some criticisms of the overall response. You also saw him once again being called up to the podium to walk that back a little bit. I asked him at one point when we saw one of these walkbacks, as he was standing next to the president and vice president who have the power to take him off this task force, if he did this voluntarily. He wasn't thrilled with the question, but he said yes. He denied that he was under any pressure to walk back these criticisms. Most folks who criticize or contradict this administration don't last too long in their jobs. But so far, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he has remained on the task force, remained in a very high-profile role, doing media appearances all the time, trying to get their message out, even through some non-traditional channels.
And it's very interesting, as you point out, that since he is not a political appointee and maybe not beholden to the president in the same way as some of the other members of the administration, would he still be able to come on air, come here to CBS and talk to all of us, talk to Americans freely about what he's seeing in terms of the coronavirus?
Yeah, I think if the task force was to disband, I mean, right now you can see he felt free to talk to a reporter, even while the vice president was having his own event. He feels free to talk on the record, which we're grateful for, so we can make sure we're getting the whole message, not just relying on the press office or events that the press office arranges. I do think that he would be able to do some of these media appearances. A lot of this is orchestrated through the White House press office right now. Since Mark Meadows has come in, he's really taken over a lot of that back to the main White House press office. But if he went back to NIH, I would think that perhaps he would like to continue to talk about public health, specifically coronavirus, use this platform that he's had in various stages, both through the AIDS epidemic, now in coronavirus. He's had a very esteemed career. He's famous in his own right long before he was on this task force. I wouldn't be surprised if he continued to do a lot of media appearances to talk about these issues that he thinks is really important. And if he left the task force, it might be a little easier for him to do that. But so far, I must say, they've made him widely available to a variety of outlets, even like Barstool Sports and some other creative ways they've found to help him get the message out to folks who may not be, reading the New York Times or keeping an eye on the wires.
Well, this is very big news and very impressive reporting by you, Paula. Before I let you go, you had also previously been reporting on some of the things that are happening within the administration, that some people felt like, from a campaign and a re-election standpoint, that these daily briefings were not helping President Trump. Could all of this and the winding down of the task force be related to that?
That's really the only conclusion we're left with, because clearly if you're not consulting Dr. Anthony Fauci, this is unlikely to be a science-based decision to wind down the coronavirus task force. It appears to be more of a political decision. Because the coronavirus outbreak has been devastating to the U.S. economy. The president was banking on a strong economy to propel him to re-election. He is under enormous pressure from a lot of outside conservative advisors to reopen America, to get folks back to work, even though we see these models projecting that additional lives will likely be lost if we roll back these social distancing efforts, these mitigation efforts too soon. So it does appear that a lot of this is done with an eye to November 2020, but it's not just the president. He is hearing from a lot of conservative groups, a lot of conservative advisors, states that have not been hit as hard by coronavirus, that they want to get back to business. So there does appear to be an effort underway here at the White House to shift the conversation from sort of these medical briefings, the medical focus, back to economic revival.
Very big news. The vice president announcing that the task force is going to start winding down in the coming weeks. Paula Reid, thank you for bringing it to us.